What is going on, everyone? It is College Football Talk, and I am your host, Hunter DeLauder, and today is Week 14 recap. We're going to dive into all the biggest action from this past weekend as we have drawn to the end of the regular season. It's crazy how fast the season's already gone by. Feels like just yesterday we were starting off with Labor Day weekend, getting ready for Week 1 games, and now we're already looking ahead and previewing conference championship weeks coming up here this weekend. So we have plenty to unpack. Make sure you guys are subscribing to the podcast. Trying to get to 200 subscribers. So the only way we can do that, though, is always remember, hit that subscribe button because that's the only way we can grow the channel. Like, share the videos as well. And if you're listening on Spotify or Amazon Music, like and follow there too. If you want to hit me up on the socials, at DeLauder Hunter on Twitter, and then Hunter.DeLauder83 on Instagram. So we have plenty to unpack. We're going to dive right into it. And we're going to start with the Friday game, the Friday night game that possibly enters in the game of the year criteria. An absolute classic went down in between the hedges on Friday night. Black Friday, number 7 Georgia survives an 8 overtime classic against Georgia Tech, 44-42. This one, I mean, if you're a fan of either one of these teams or just a college football fan in general, you were on the edge of your seat, I think, the whole time. I mean, early on, though, it was Georgia Tech. I mean, they looked like a well-oiled machine. They were beating down on Georgia for the first half, mostly into like the third quarter, too. I mean, Georgia Tech led 17-0 at half. Their first half stats alone, they outgained Georgia in total yards, 307 to 137, and then rushing-wise, 157 yards to 28. I mean, that's just utter domination by Georgia Tech. And, I mean, they were the more physical team. They wanted it more. They were more hungry. They had more life than Georgia did. Georgia, I mean, they were moving the ball a little bit on offense, but then again, the same thing that's plagued them all year reared its head back again early on in the quarter or early on in the game. It was turnovers and dropped passes. I mean, the running game is what it is to this point with how banged up they are and just how inconsistent it is. So, like, I mean, they've got to be able to rely on these receivers, and they just have not been able to live up on their, fulfill their side of the, weight scale, I guess. I don't know how you would say that, but you get what I'm saying. Like, they're just not, they're not helping out at all. And that's been an issue all year. It's the reason why they lead the nation in dropped passes because, I mean, they can't catch the ball. They're too inconsistent doing so. However, second half, as Georgia has done all year, they stormed right back. You knew they were going to put up a fight. You know they weren't going to go just laying down, especially at home. They have a 30-game win streak on the line to their in-state rival. There's no way. And there was a moment I was thinking about laying, Georgia money line. At that point, they were like plus 220 on the money line going into half. So I didn't, but it was a thought right there. But then, I mean, Georgia's second half outscored Georgia Tech, including the overtimes, 44-25. They scored 44 points, including the overtimes. I mean, really in the overtimes, they only scored 4 points. So, I mean, the Dogs, they came roaring back. You knew they were. You knew they weren't going to go down lying down quietly. I mean, but this game looked all but over late in the fourth quarter. 27-13, the game was at, just a little over 5 minutes to go. I mean, there were people leaving. I mean, they were by the masses. There were people leaving. And then, Georgia, credit to Georgia. They went down the field very quickly. They went, I think it was like 75 yards in just over 2 minutes. Got the score to cut it to 7, but the defense was going to have to make a stop. They had not been able to get a stop all night long. I mean, they were allowing big chunks on the ground all night long. Georgia Tech averaged 5.5 yards a carry on Friday night. They had 260 yards on the ground in total. And so they were going to have to make a play. And it was Dan the Man, Dirty Dan Jackson, who gets the big forced fumble on Haynes King. Chaz Chambliss recovers it. Dogs are set up inside the Georgia Tech 30. And then, just like that, Georgia scored, forced overtime. And then that's when we were off and running into overtime. And the game was far from over. If you thought this was going to be over in maybe 1 or 2 overtimes. To save you the time, though, headlines of the overtime, the biggest ones came later on. Georgia goal line stand as they held Haynes King in check from the 1 yard line. This was coming off of a pass interference call that was called on Georgia. That set Georgia Tech up at the 1 yard line. All they had to do was score, and the game was over. And Credit to Chaz Chambliss. He makes a great play on the guard who's pulling. He pushes him back inside, forces Haynes King to kind of hesitate for a second, and CJ Allen's right there to make the big play. And then Georgia Tech had another chance to score going into the 8th overtime at the top of the 8th, and they were not able to as there was pressure again from CJ Allen. And CJ Allen had a really nice game. Him and Dan Jackson, I think, were the two best players defensively for Georgia. And obviously, then the game-winning touchdown by Nate Frazier in the 8th overtime capped off a crazy, crazy night. But looking from a distance, from this game, though, both quarterbacks were brilliant. Talked about how going into this game, I just didn't think Haynes King was going to be that guy that was going to be like that elite quarterback to beat Georgia, because elite quarterbacks most of the time have been the ones that have beaten Georgia. I mean, I don't think Jackson Dart's elite, but he's certainly very, very good. And so obviously, and he had no problem beating Georgia, taking apart that secondary and this defense. But I mean, Haynes King was going to have to figure out a way to pull some kind of magic out, and he did. He looked like Tim Tebow out there, like 08 Tim Tebow, just running around, throwing the ball all over the place. He went 26 to 36, 303 yards and 2 touchdowns to the air, 24 carries, 110 yards. He averaged almost 5 yards a carry. He had 3 touchdowns on the ground. An absolute warrior. I mean, God bless him. I mean, they kept sending him out there to run and run and run. He was getting beat up, and he would just never quit. And credit to him. And Carson Beck, don't look now. Carson Beck now, last 3 games, 11 touchdowns, no interceptions. He now leads the SEC in touchdown passes. He has 28 touchdowns now on the year. He passes his last season's total already. Beck went 28 to 43. He had 5 touchdowns in the second half alone and threw for 297 yards. I mean, he looked great on Friday. He wasn't getting help, and he was starting to show a little bit of frustration at some points in the game, but never wavered, never lost any confidence, at least, to my eyes. And he just kept slinging it around, and his receivers made enough plays. The tight ends are really starting to step up and emerge as like that big time target, that old reliable kind of target. Oscar Delp's been that guy. Cash Jones is becoming a difference maker. London Humphreys is now starting to make some plays. They're hoping to get Colby Young back sooner rather than later. And listen, Jacoby White's still hanging around. He's starting to get more reps. Nitro Tuggle is starting to get more reps. Like, if they can just kind of start just being more consistent, this is a dangerous team right here. And now Georgia, you would think for the most part, becomes a lock for the playoffs. I think they're like a 99.2% chance now, 98, something like that. Upper 90s, like they're for sure a lock now, especially now with Texas going in. You would assume that they are a lock, because even if they lose to Texas this weekend, they can say, though, we beat that team in Austin when they were number 1 in the country already. So they just avenged their only loss. So I think they're a for sure lock to get in. So, but credit to Georgia Tech, credit to Brent Key. He thoroughly outcoached Kirby Smart for most of the game, but I think Kirby Smart took advantage of the overtime. He outcoached Brent Key in overtime, and that was ultimately the difference maker for sure. All right, moving on, though, to possibly the biggest shockwave of the sport on Saturday. Michigan, 19.5-point Michigan, beats number 2 Ohio State in Columbus, 13-10. Talk about a slop fest this was, and we talked about that last week on the pod going into the preview. But it's Michigan's 4th straight year now of beating Ohio State. The senior class for Ohio State has never beaten Michigan. But what do we talk about? How did Michigan do this? Well, they did everything they needed to. They slowed the game down. They won the time of possession by almost 7 minutes. They were the more physical team all day long. They outrushed Ohio State 173-77. That dynamic, supposedly dynamic running back duo, Quinshon Judkins, TreVeyon Henderson, non-existent. It's been like that all year. That's been the biggest question mark, and I've talked about it repeatedly on this podcast, how just, weird it's been, the fact that they haven't showed up when they've needed to. It's been super inconsistent, and you thought there was no way this would happen. I mean, a little bit of injuries, bad luck on the O-line has maybe played a little bit of an issue with it, but these backs are more than good enough to overcome that, and they just have not. And it's been really, really weird to see, and it showed again. What was his name? Khalil Mullings had a really big day on the ground. He was running all over the place, and he had the biggest run of the game. It wasn't a touchdown, but it was like a 35, 40-yard run. So I mean, just underperforming once again by this Ohio State offense. And then Michigan had forced 2 huge turnovers. They had 2 turnovers of them, including a really bad interception down by the goal line. But man, they forced 2 big turnovers. And then Ohio State, they just had too many mistakes. Talk about the 2 turnovers already. And then special teams, they went 1 for 3 in field goals on special teams, including a missed one from inside 30. That's not going to get it done. It's not going to get it done. Michigan won the special teams battle, 2 for 2 in field goals made, including the game winner one. Will Howard struggled all day long. He only went 19 of 33, 175 yards through 2 interceptions. He had the 1 touchdown later on at the end of the half, but other than that, it was a dud game all game long. I mean, and this is against a really poor Michigan secondary that didn't even have Will Johnson in the game. And so the fact that you couldn't even do that with your weapons who were all healthy, really, really not a good look. For a team that had spent over, I think it was over $10 million in NIL and whatever else to assemble this roster, to not beat your most bitter rival in the year that was supposed to be like your best team in years against a Michigan team that had lost, I think, over 15 starters on both sides of the football, that had no offense, no quarterback, nothing. Defense isn't even very good. For you to get thoroughly outplayed again, and this time at home, nonetheless, it's shocking. It's shocking beyond disbelief. I don't know how it is. I mean, part of it, I think, is let's be honest. Like, Will Howard's not anything special. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, he's having a decent year, but like, you kicked Kyle McCord out because after he went, 11 win season last year in the regular season, you kick him to the curb, you leave him for dead. He goes to Syracuse. He leads the nation in passing yards right now. And he has a top 3 passing unit up in Syracuse. They just beat Miami. And you go out and you go out and pick as your best option a guy that got kicked out because he knew he was going to get beat out at Kansas State by Avery Johnson. You go out and get Will Howard, who got beat out by a freshman at Kansas State. But you think he's the best guy for the job. I mean, that's not a good look on Ryan Day. And speaking of Ryan Day, I don't know what the next step is for him. I mean, I don't know what they do because this is now 4 straight losses. You can win all the other big games, but when you are 1-4 against Michigan, that's just not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it. And I don't know what Ohio State's going to do. I know Ohio State fans are pretty much at this point now fed up with him. I mean, this is like the final straw in the camel's back. Like, you've done your time. It's, you're James Franklin pretty much, where you can win all the easier games, the underperformers, but when the big game comes, you're still left on third base, born on third base, haven't scored yet. I mean, what else do we have to do, Ryan? I mean, you bring all of these guys back defensively. You bring in Caleb Downs, all of these other guys. I mean, you got guys on the outside with Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Emeka Ibuka. You bring in Will Howard, who's a decent quarterback. He's nothing special, but then you get these 2 dynamic running backs in the backfield. You have everything there. You bring Chip Kelly, and you still can't beat a crappy Michigan team? Really? What are we doing? It's not good. It's not good at all. As far as Ohio State goes, though, they should get dropped out of the top 8. But they won't. They'll probably fall to 6 or 7. It's terrible. There's no reason why they should be in the top 8. You lose as almost a 4 touchdown favorite, and you get beat by a team that has no business, that is 6-5. You're playing at home as a damn near 3.5, 4 touchdown favorite, and you get thoroughly outplayed again. What are we doing? They need to be dropped out of the top 8. Georgia lost on the road as a slight 2.5-point favorite to a much, much better Ole Miss team that is a borderline playoff team. They got outplayed 28-10. They lost, and they dropped 9 spots from 3 to 12. If Ohio State stays in the top 8, what are we doing? What are we doing? I mean, I get you have the wins over Indiana and Penn State. I mean, their records aren't anything better as far as resumes go. But what are we doing? I mean, you got to drop it. You have to establish some sort of ground here when we're losing to teams at home as 4 touchdown favorites and getting outplayed in the process. So there's my rant right there on that game. Moving on, though, number 3, Texas takes down number 20, Texas A&M, 17-7. What an environment College Station was. The intro was probably one of the coolest I've seen in a college football game. I mean, between the band playing, power going as the team comes out on the field, the entire crowd doing the fight song. Awesome crowd. It was the first time they've played since 2011. But unfortunately for Texas A&M, they just could not get anything going offensively. It was all Texas, really. The score does not indicate how one-sided this game really was. I mean, Texas was going up and down the field at will. They outgained A&M in total yards, 461 to 248. Passing yards, 218 to 146. Rushing was 243 to 102. Time of possession, they outgained them by almost 9 minutes. First downs, 26 to 15. It was an absolute one-sided game in this one. And if it really wasn't for 2 bad turnovers by Quinn Ewers, pretty much around the same spot inside the A&M 15, this is a 30 to nothing game. The only touchdown scored by A&M was a pick 6. Other than that, they had nothing. They got stuffed in the red zone twice. It was just too many missed opportunities by A&M. First quarter, they go right down the field. They get down to the Texas 19, and then they run the ball up the middle 4 times, and they get stuffed. Okay. And then, fourth quarter, you just blocked a punt. You're down 10. Clock's winding down, but you're still in the game. You still have a chance. You block the punt. You get it inside the 20. You get all the way down to the Texas 1-yard line. You run the ball up the middle 3 times, and you get stuffed. The fourth down call, the third and fourth down calls. There's a golden rule to anybody, realistically, unless you're confident enough you can score. If you have the ball at the 1-yard line with a decent quarterback, why are we taking the ball from the shotgun? You just dropped yourself back 5 yards, especially if you're going to hand the ball off. B, why aren't we just getting under center and trying to push him into the end zone? You need 1 to half a yard. Get under center, get your fullback or whatever, get a defensive lineman in behind you and push him in. Taking the ball from the shotgun to hand it off is useless. You can't do it. And that's what they did. Actually, I want to think the fourth down call might have been under center too, which makes it even worse because you can't do that. I just thought, you take the ball, you took the ball out of Marcel Reed's hands there when you could have utilized his legs in somewhere. You could have done a zone read. You got it. I mean, I would have done a zone read. I would have taken my chances doing that because how stout that defensive line is. They weren't running the ball up the middle at all night long. Their best success running the ball was on the outside the tackles. Those outside counter zone plays. I mean, to not do that at the end of the game when you needed a score, and then to go for it on fourth down, knowing you're down 10, you could have kicked the field goal there to cut it to 7 at least, because they got the ball back, but then they ended up fumbling it. But you roll the dice, and I don't care if you roll the dice, but we got to have a better play call than that. I mean, I don't care what team it was. I don't care who's getting the ball as a running back spot. It could have been Walter Payton. Could have been Jim Brown, Derrick Henry, Najee Harris. I don't know. Marshawn Lynch. It doesn't matter. They were getting blown up right there. And it immediately blew up right when the ball was snapped. I mean, we had guys. There was like 2 guys that rushed right through. They had no chance. No chance Tamari Daniels had. Player of the game, though, for me was Quintravion Wisner. 33 carries, 186 yards. He averaged almost 6 yards a carry. He was giving A&M fits all night long. They could not stop him. I mean, he was just running the ball at will, gushing them for big plays. And that was really a big factor because if you can run the ball like that, similar to how Georgia Tech was, I mean, they were just milking the clock, long drives, and then you were just setting up big plays down the field. And that's the secret sauce right there if you're Texas, because they really didn't have any really big like down the field shots. They had a couple nice like yards at the catch plays. I know Gunnar Helm had a few nice catches, but I mean, it was Wisner, and he was really just doing all the working. I mean, he was getting them down the field, and then Ewers would just make a couple nice passes to open guys, and they were scoring. So tough night for A&M because you had everything right there in front of you to clinch a spot in the SEC title game. You don't, and you lose to your rival again. So you'll get a crack at them next year in Austin. So see if they'll bounce back next year. But Texas gets to head to Atlanta for the first in their inaugural season in the SEC. So nice job there by Texas. They will take on Georgia again in a rematch. We'll preview that later on this week. All right, number 15, South Carolina rallies late to beat number 12 Clemson 17-14. The Gamecocks get their first win against the Clemson Tigers since 2022. Ironically enough, happened in Clemson. All right. So let's break this down real quick. Very physical. It was a very physical game, defensive-led game, really, the whole time. A lot of sacks, a lot of turnovers in this one. Clemson had 3 sacks. They forced 3 turnovers and had 6 tackles for loss. South Carolina forced 2 turnovers, had 1 sack, but were getting pressure, 3 tackles for loss. I thought both quarterbacks did a nice job throughout the game, using their legs, getting out of trouble when they needed to, because those sack numbers could have been a lot worse for both sides. And so good job on both sides. Good job for both quarterbacks being able to use those legs and stuff. I mean, Lanorris Sellers, what a game. 13-21, 164 yards, 1 pick. But it was really the story of the game was his legs. I mean, the rushing, though, I mean, Clemson had no answers. Too many times they let him out to just run around. Both touchdowns he scored were off of broken plays. He had 16 carries, 166 yards. He averaged 10.4 yards a run. He had 2 touchdowns, including the game-winning one with just over a minute to go. And talk about the other quarterback. I mean, Cade Klubnik, I thought he had a good game. And that was something I really was interested to see, because to this point against solid opponents, like, he has not had that big-time game. He went 24-36, 280 yards, no touchdowns through the air. He did have 2 rushing touchdowns, including also 62 yards on the ground. Like, again, like he had a nice job running the ball when he needed to. And I thought that was a big story of the game. I think both teams were able to just kind of utilize the clock. The stats wise, they're pretty even both sides. But the big play of the game was Demetrius Knight's pick as Clemson was driving, maybe not even to tie the game, but to win it. I mean, they were inside the South Carolina 35, I want to say, and before it was tipped up. It might have been tipped, I can't remember, but Demetrius Knight made a really nice diving catch to intercept it and ice the game for the Gamecocks. But as far as South Carolina goes as a whole, at this point, you have to think that this is a playoff team. I know they have the losses to Alabama and Ole Miss. You can't deny that. And, I mean, you don't have to play the hypotheticals for those games. Like, the results are on the field. I just think this team has now won 6 straight games. They have won now 4 road games this year in the SEC, 4 SEC road games, plus they've won 4 SEC road games plus this one. I mean, they were stolen a game by LSU. There was a couple bad plays. They left wanting back against Alabama. But this team's just playing. It's one of the best teams right now in the country. If you want the 12 best teams in the country in this playoff, South Carolina needs to be in it. That's just my opinion. I think that they are right now one of the 12 best teams playing football right now, and it's hard to argue it. I mean, you go on the road, you beat a number 12 Clemson team that right now will play for an ACC title game. So now you got to start thinking about, if Clemson wins the ACC title game, what do you do with South Carolina? Because Clemson's going to get an automatic bid, but now you have a South Carolina team that went to Clemson and beat them, and is playing as good at football as anybody else in the country right now. It's going to be interesting to see. I'm very intrigued to see where the committee puts them. I have them at 10 in my rankings. I don't think they're going to fall that far, but I just think that they are right now one of the top 10 best teams in the nation. I would assume they're probably pushing maybe like 13, I would say. But it's hard to argue putting them not in. But then it's just tough, though, because you have Ole Miss and Bama in front of you. And realistically, Ole Miss went to Williams-Brice and outclassed South Carolina. Bama, it was a gross, ugly game that they're lucky to win. So it's going to be an interesting debate down the stretch here. But as far as a team that really hurt themselves and essentially knocked themselves out, that would be Miami. Syracuse beats number 6 Miami 42-38. I said in the preview, this was like an upset alert level 10. Miami was going to need to have their A game ready to roll. And again, the same issues happen where the defense failed them again. I mean, you put 38 points up, you expect to win. But Miami's defense has been terrible all year long. I just thought Mario Cristobal got out-coached down the stretch too in this game, made some really poor coaching decisions. And it honestly felt like whoever had the ball last was going to win, and that's kind of like what happened here. Miami led 21-0 out of the gate, making plays, going right up and down the field. And Syracuse, for a moment, it looked like they had no answers, but they calmed down. McCord had a slow start, but kind of rallied back. They stormed all the way back to tie it. Both offenses were brilliant. Syracuse finished the day with 482 yards. Miami, 503 yards. The quarterback play was outstanding for both teams. I mean, but that's nothing new. I mean, coming into this game, these two teams, Syracuse ranked second, Miami ranked third in both in passing offenses. So, like, you knew you were going to get a high-scoring game. These two teams, defensively wise, it's a little so-so. Miami, it's really bad. So, I mean, Cam Ward, 25-36, 349. He had 2 touchdowns. He averaged almost 10 yards a carry or 10 yards a completion. Kyle McCord, 26-36, 380 through the air, 3 touchdowns. And both teams did have really bad fumbles, but the Miami one was the more crucial one. Syracuse did fumble, but Miami didn't do anything with it. They recovered it when Syracuse was driving. And then a couple plays later, it was a screen pass to Xavier Restrepo, and it gets knocked out, and then it becomes a 56-yard Devin Grant scoop and score to take the lead, 35-28, late in the third quarter. And then, get all the way to the end of the fourth, closer to the end of the fourth. Miami's driving. They get down to the goal line. They stall out at the 10. And then Cristobal decides to kick the field goal to cut the lead to 4 with just under 4 to play. And I just thought that was a bad decision. A, you're taking the ball out of your best player, Cam Ward, and all of his weapons. B, you are now saying you trust your defense to make a play when they've shown that they can't, not just in this game, but all year long, they haven't been able to make a stop in any crucial moment. And I just don't know how you can trust them at that point. So, just taking the ball out of your best player, since I would rather just roll the dice, go for it, knowing damn well you can't trust your defense to get a stop at all because they hadn't been able to do it at all on Saturday. So then to take it out of your best player's hand when he easily could have made a play. What happens if they go for it? All those weapons, they put stress on that secondary, you get a penalty. And all of a sudden you're right there inside the 5, ready to score again to tie it up. Instead, you kick a field goal. It's like more of like a surrender, waving the white flag there. But then, obviously Syracuse was able to eat the clock up. Miami never got the ball back. And for Miami, that, not being able to win this game to go to the ACC title game is really a failure, I think, on the season. Because with that second loss, they're essentially knocked out of the playoff because resume-wise, there's nothing there. No meat on the bone. The best win for them is Florida, and that's a 7-5 football team. It's a different 7-5 football team right now. But that's your best win. So, it's tough for Miami because kind of like Ohio State, like this was a big year for Miami. And just we're not able to make enough plays defensively to, get where you want it to be. It's kind of like LSU last year. The offense would be able to score on anybody at will. When you needed points, they were going to be able to score points for you. But defensively, an absolute failure, shamble, whatever you want to call it. It was a disgrace. And again, it held LSU back last year. Same thing this year. Miami's defense held this team back from possibly winning a national title. It just is what it is. But as far as Syracuse goes, what a win for Fran Brown. First year head coaching in college football, and he takes over a Syracuse team that was a sneaky team because of how manageable I think the schedule would be. But still, to go out there and do it, you pick up Kyle McCord, who was left for dead by Ohio State. You bring over Jackson Meeks, too, from Georgia. And they've been a dynamic. It's been a dynamic passing offense. It's been a high tempo scoring offense. And defensively, they're playing well. They're going to get better, obviously, as time goes on. But to finish the regular season 9-3, you're going to go to a decent bowl game. Like, what if that's a great first year for a first-year coach like that? All right. Going to now head around the country here. We're going to get right through this here. Make sure you guys are subscribing to the podcast. Remember, we're trying to get to 200 subscribers. Only way we can do that is if you guys hit that subscribe button below. All right. Around the country, we're going to start Thanksgiving night. Memphis takes down number 17 Tulane 34-24. Memphis really controlled this game for just about the entire game. There was a brief moment Tulane had a little bit of life, and then they threw a late turnover. I want to say it was a couple late turnovers really just kind of was the dagger. And unfortunately for Tulane, regardless if they win the AAC this weekend, they are going to be knocked out of the playoff race. They really needed to win the next two to have a brief shot. Unfortunately, did not get that done. Ole Miss beat Mississippi State closer than Ole Miss probably would like it to be, 26-14, but they were able to overcome a little bit of a early defensive woes, letting Mississippi State score, and they were able to lock it down and make the necessary plays to beat their most bitter rival. Iowa beat Nebraska 13-10. Not much to say right there. Utah beats UCF 28-14. Gus Malzahn steps down as head coach right after the game, pretty much for UCF. He will now take over as offensive coordinator at Florida State. It's an interesting move, but we'll see how that goes. I did see something today that Tony White, defensive coordinator in Nebraska, one of the better defensive coordinators in the country, is the leading candidate right now to take over that defensive coordinator's position at Florida State. Colorado beats Oklahoma State 52-0. The Oklahoma State Cowboys finished the year 3-9. They lost 9 in a row to finish out the year after starting 3-0. Colorado gets to 9 wins on the year. Travis Hunter, 10 catches, 116, and he 3 touchdowns, and he did record an interception on the defensive side of the football. And then Shedeur Sanders, 34-41, 438. He had 5 touchdowns. A little bit of stat padding, but we'll allow it this time. It's the first shutout. I forget if they said the stat, but great for Colorado to get a shutout like that on senior day. Taking care of business, never giving Oklahoma State any sort of life to even hang around on the game. Boise State beat Oregon 34-18. Ashton Genty had himself another day, 37 carries, 226, 1 touchdown. The People's Heisman is what I'm calling that. Minnesota beat Wisconsin 24-7. I'm disappointed in Wisconsin. Needed this win at home to get to bowl eligibility, and he got thoroughly spanked by Minnesota. Texas Tech beat West Virginia 52-15. Neil Brown fired as head coach at West Virginia, so there will be a new head coach starting next year at Morgantown. Tennessee beat Vanderbilt 36-23. The Commodores led 17-7 in the first quarter off a kickoff return and a couple turnovers by Tennessee, but unable to sustain the lead as Tennessee came storming back and ended up taking control and never letting it go. Louisville beat Kentucky 41-14. This was never a game. Duke walks off against Wake Forest 23-17 on a Hail Mary. Baylor beat Kansas 45-17. Kansas needed this one to get to bowl eligibility. We had him as a best bet, just did not come ready to go. Army beat UTSA 29-24. Unfortunately, they won but did not cover. But they will have a chance now to win, just like Texas, to win their conference for the first time as a new blood in the conference. Penn State beat Maryland 44-7. They fell behind early, but once they got ahead, and they never obviously looked back. Clinched a spot in the Big Ten title game. They will take on Oregon in Indianapolis on Saturday night. Notre Dame held off USC 49-35. It was a late pick 6 by Xavier Watts, to essentially clinch the game as USC was driving to tie the game. And then Watts said, no thanks. SMU beat Cal, never messed around, 38-6. They take care of business. Alabama beat Auburn 28-14. Jalen Milroe had a bunch of turnovers, but Auburn had too many turnovers and too many crucial moments. What has plagued them all year, reared its head around again. And then Jarquez Hunter was not utilized really at all. There was a play at the end of the half where they decided to kick a field goal instead of go for it on 4th down inside the 3. And, that was kind of like a story of the game, kind of just missed opportunities and just not utilizing the offense right. Like they had a trick play late in the game when they were trailing by 14, and Jarquez Hunter threw an interception. Like what are we doing doing trick plays like that? Arizona State hammered Arizona 50s 49-7, clinched a spot in the Big 12 title game, and didn't even mess around. That was one of the few teams this weekend that just didn't mess around with playoff or conference title game stakes on the line. They just go out there, take care of business. Missouri beat Arkansas 28-21 in the snow. NC State beat North Carolina 35-30. Indiana slams Purdue 66-0. Ryan Walters out as the Purdue head coach. Florida beat Florida State 31-11. First time the Gators have beaten the Seminoles since 2021. Yes. I'll have to double check on that one. LSU beat Oklahoma 37-17. Oregon beat Washington 49-21. Didn't talk about this one last week, but Oregon gets a revenge on Washington, I guess. Washington beat them twice last year and kept them out of the playoff. Iowa State beats Kansas State 29-21. The Iowa State Cyclones are heading to the Big 12 title game. They'll take on Arizona State. UNLV beat Nevada 38-14. Not only is that a resume builder still for Boise State, but they will get that rematch against the Broncos in Idaho on the blue turf this Friday night. UNLV, Barry Odom and the group have a chance now, playoff bound possibly. Rivalry week. Getting ahead of myself right there. That was all for around the country. Obviously, a lot of action went down. Rivalry week's one of the best weeks, and unfortunately, this week though it became a little bit too rowdy. As this week became Fight Club, there were fights all over the country. End-of-game fights, in-game fights. BYU had a fight with Houston that had players ejected. Alabama and Auburn were getting into a massive scrum on the sidelines after a play was over. That didn't have anybody ejected, but, I mean, there was a couple unsportsmanlike conduct calls. And then you had the post-game shenanigans. Ohio State, Michigan. We had Michigan people planting a flag. That led to a huge fight that involved pepper spray being sprayed by police force. There's no reason for that. Come on, what are we doing? And it looked like for the most part, it was Michigan players that were getting sprayed. I don't know about the Ohio State players. And then you have Ryan Day on the outside of all this, just being like, what happened? But you have Sharon Moore, who's in the middle of this thing, possibly getting pepper sprayed. Not a good look for Ryan Day right there, as if it could be worse for him. So you have that. You have Arizona and Arizona State getting into it after Arizona State, who thoroughly just beats the ever-living crap out of Arizona. Plants a Triton in the midfield. That led to a huge fight. NC State, North Carolina, same thing. I mean, Florida State, we had a planting of the flag that led to a scrum. Mike Norvell got into it. He was giving words to Billy Napier, and then he went and grabbed the flag and threw it down. And then Florida was, roughing up the field, tearing sod out. I mean, I don't get it. And then we talked about Alabama. Listen, I'm all for teams celebrating, getting a big time win, letting the boys have fun. I'm all for it. But there's a certain point, you did your business, especially if you won and you're doing this, you did your business on the road. You did your business. You got the win. Congratulations. You celebrate on the field. I don't care what you do. But then, do the silly stuff. It's what are we doing? Especially then, let's take Ohio State, for example. Plant the flag, but then you start a massive brawl on your own field. Learn to lose, all right? You got your asses kicked on Saturday for 4 quarters. They showed more fight and more energy post-game than they did the whole game. Where was that during the game when you were allowed to do what you were doing? That's when you're allowed to essentially fight, because when the kickoff, from opening kickoff to the final whistle, that's when you do your business. You don't do it after the game and start a huge brawl. And that's where I'm just I agree with Cleo Mulling said it after the game. I was watching a Chris Fowler thing. There needs to be repercussions about who was involved in this kind of stuff, because this stuff can't happen. We can't be doing this. There's a certain line that gets crossed, and I'm all for having fun on the side, or having fun post game, doing whatever. But we can't have having giant brawls like this. So that's my 2 cents on it. And wrap up today's episode with our best bets recap. Went 5-6 on the weekend. Again, listen, we were 1 game under. There was, Army not covering is a little bit hurt. Trying to think who else. USC not covering really hurt because, again, plus 7.5 felt like a lock for most of the game, and then they threw the pick 6. And then they had the audacity to score the touchdown. Oh, just hurt. Just hurt right there. I'm trying to think who else. I think there was one more that really hurt. I can't remember. But South Carolina made a nice cover for us. It is what it is. But on the right side, though, we finished 8 games over 500, clinching a winning regular season. We're going to, obviously, we'll have conference championship picks. I've already locked up a few. Oregon is a minus 3.5 against Penn State. We've already played that one. I'll give you who I picked in that one on Thursday's episode. But just know that it involves a quack. That's all I'll say on that one. But again, 5-6 on the week. We finished the regular season 40-32-1. So a profitable year, not profitable year nonetheless. And hopefully we'll build into bowl season and hopefully keep riding the hot hand. But unfortunately, as all the good things do come to an end, as today's episode presented by nothing will come to an end today. And make sure you guys are subscribing to the podcast, getting those numbers up, liking, sharing the videos. And if you're listening on Spotify or Amazon Music or wherever else, make sure you guys are liking, giving the channel a follow, because that's the only way we can continue to grow the channel and get to where we want to be. So without further ado, we'll be back later this week for Conference Championship preview. Until then, like, subscribe, watch, listen, whatever you do. I'm Hunter DeLauder, signing out.